Yes, so hello, Lee Dowsett, Animation Director at EA Canada.
And I'm Geoff Harrower, Senior Software Engineer and Lead Gameplay Engineer on UFC.
Yeah, and we both worked on the UFC. The game came out in June of last year, and we've just got a little trailer narrated by our creative director to show you what the game's all about. Actually, before that, we've got an introduction, which we've kind of done already, so we'll skip that. And here's a little bit of what our game's all about.
From flash knockouts to 5-round wars, going to battle in the octagon can push a fighter's body to its limits, and sometimes beyond. Whether you're slipping a jab, throwing a hook, or loading up a haymaker, we wanted EA Sports UFC's fighting engine to show off the same fluidity you'd see in a real fight, and that starts from the ground up. You won't see our fighters sliding or skating across the canvas. Instead, their feet will actually press into the surface of the octagon. Transfer that power into a strike and send the opposition reeling with a perfectly placed blow. Not only will they feel it, but you'll be able to see it as you send a shockwave rippling through their body. But don't forget, striking isn't the only way for you to put the hurt on your opponents. Sink into submission and watch a fighter struggle as you strain their limbs or constrict their circulation. Our new full-body deformation system means that flesh displaces flesh. Muscles contort and skin flushes to help create a greater sense of urgency than ever before. Fighting with a plan in EA Sports UFC makes all the difference. Overexert yourself too early, and you'll end up gassed for the later rounds, meaning your technique gets sloppy and strikes pack less power. Rather than only sustaining incremental damage and seeing progressive change, one well-placed blow now has the ability to devastate and open up a fighter. Thousands of hours went into making sure our fighters look their best, but whether or not they stay that way is up to you. Not every wound is pretty, and sometimes you've got to pay the price if you want to be the best. Stay tuned for more Dev Diaries as we break down our striking and submission gameplay and take a look at the living world of EA Sports UFC. Feel the fight for yourself when EA Sports UFC drops this spring.
So yeah, there's a little taster for those who haven't seen the game. And here's a quick overview of the presentation. So I guess I'll be running the first part of the presentation. As I've mentioned earlier, I'm an animator, so I'll just be talking about our animation pipeline, basically from the design all the way through to completion and getting the assets in game.
And I'm going to go into some more technical details about how we dealt with different proportion characters and animating them against each other, and our locomotion system, and how we dealt with the problem of proceduralizing animation over a very large set of fighter-specific animations.
Cool. So before we go anywhere, I've just got to put this slide up there. We are a huge debt to EA Sports MMA. This game shipped from our Tiburon team in 2010, and without them, I don't think we would have got our game out the door. We had access to all of the team's design documents, so we had a really, really good, strong foundation to start our game with. We were in production for 20 months. We started in, I guess, late 2012 or something it must have been. We had access to all of their motion capture and all of their animation libraries as well. We didn't end up shipping with many, if any, of their animations, but for prototyping in the early days, it was fantastic to have a full catalog of MMA assets. We had access to their AMP project, their game engine, and their interaction controller designs. A lot of these evolved over the time, and by the time we were using them, a lot of them were kind of defunct. But again, it was really, really good for prototyping in the early days. And most importantly, we had access to the people that made, MMA, and they were really, really generous with their time. And as I say, I don't think we would have shipped on time or to the level of quality we got to without that team. And on the subject of teams, building the right one, I was really, really fortunate that I got to build my animation team from scratch. It was very, very small. I had 4 gameplay animators, including myself, and 1 presentation animator. I think when we shipped, we had, 6,000 to 7,000 animation assets in the game by the time we shipped. So for me, it was really important to get the right people. And I'm terrible with left and right, so I think it's my top left. The guy up there on the podium, Jeremy Matheson, he's my lead gameplay animator, and he's a really good example of the kind of people I try to bring on board. He's got 15 years of animation experience. On top of that, he's a college and high school wrestler. He trained Muay Thai for a couple of years. He's been doing no-gi jiu-jitsu for 10 years. And he's also had a professional boxing fight. So he's basically a living, breathing encyclopedia of the UFC and MMA, and on top of that, he's an unbelievably good animator. And, you know, that's what we were trying to achieve with all of the animators we hired, is people that were passionate about the sport. I can't stress this enough. This really, really wound me up on the, during the production of UFC 1. You know, push for full-time employees. The temporary solution really, really sucks sometimes. The guy just below Jeremy there, Dmitry Kuperman, again, another fantastic animator. He's a Russian guy. He had a Sambo background going through college. I couldn't secure him as an RFT, and he owned two of our major features in our game. He owned our clinch game and our takedown system. And he left at the end of the project because we couldn't secure him a spot as a full-time employee, and that knowledge went with him. Luckily, I've got him back for the UFC 2 as a full-timer, but we lost a couple of other guys. My facial animator, who basically designed our facial pipeline, he disappeared, and I'm now ramping up a new facial animator. And she's absolutely awesome, but we've lost, you know, a couple of man-months worth of work there just ramping her up. And knowledge share amongst your team. We got called out on this a few times. As I mentioned, I've got one presentation animator. He'd go on holiday for 3 weeks or something, and production would basically stop on presentation because at the time we didn't know, you know, any of his workflows. There was no documentation of what he did. We'd have guys go off sick for a couple of days, and, you know, it really hindered us. And then for us, it's really, really important to understand the sport. Jiu-jitsu and MMA as a sport, particularly the ground game, is really, really complex. And if we get it wrong, you know, the people out there let us know, yeah, usually quite heavily. So, yeah, we try and train as much as we possibly can. And as you can see there, there's the group of us in the center there. But, you know, the guy in the top right is our software engineer that designed the submission minigame. Below him's Robin. She's from our online team. We've got Geoff there as well in the bottom right-hand corner. So everybody goes into tournaments, and, you know, everybody tries to understand the sport as much as they can. And we also research the sport a lot as well. You know, we've got, I think, the back catalogue of the entire UFC. We often meet up on the weekends and watch the big fights and everything else. So again, it just kind of, you know, we've got a really, really passionate team that just, you know, love the UFC. And I guess going back to our creative director who introduced the trailer at the beginning, this is, you know, I guess nobody's more committed than he is to the cause. And so I've just got a quick video. And sorry, just before I start this as well. So as I'm walking through the animation pipeline, I'm going to be talking about submission animations, and in particular the rear naked choke, which Brian Hayes is about to demonstrate now.
Yeah, so I'm Brian Hayes, creative director on EA Sports UFC, and I foolishly have asked Kat Zingano to put me in a rear naked choke. And she graciously agreed with the stipulation that she has to be able to finish it. So hopefully things go well. How did I do this? Keep going. That was insane.
I never get tired of watching that. He's never quite been the same since.
That's true.
So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about one of our submission animations. We shipped with 26, I believe it was, in the final product, 26 individual submissions, and each one of them was made up of 21 two-man animations. I think previous to that, both MMA and THQ's UFC had a fairly small submission battle. We decided to go, you know, crazy and blow out all of them. And so, yeah, as you can see there, you know, as well as, you know, the single submission, there was escapes from every level of the battle, and we had alternative endings, and, yeah, so it's quite a complex animation system. And what we tried to do was capture it the most efficient way as possible. You know, we'd go into mocap and we'd be like, okay, we've got 26 of these to now today. So what we did was we'd get one all the way from the attempt all the way through to the finish, including all of the battles, and then we'd pick up all of the smaller pieces individually. So instead of capturing 21, 22 different animations, I think we ended up with like 9 different animation takes. And yeah, on average, they took a lot of time to animate. So from chopping up the mocap and cleaning it up to actually getting that into the in-game engine, we're probably looking about a month's worth of work per submission. And so that leads us going into mocap. Obviously, you need to pick the right talent. So, if we were doing a ground shoot, we'd bring in, high-level jiu-jitsu guys, or we'd bring in professional MMA fighters. If we were doing a stand-up shoot, we'd bring in professional Muay Thai guys or capoeira guys, professional boxers. You need to make sure you've got the right guys for the right job. Ideally there, we've got Carlos Condit and I think Josh Thompson there as well. If you can get the UFC talent in, even better. And we do a lot of rehearsing in advance of the shoot, particularly for things like the submissions, where we could probably spend half a day rehearsing how to break up a submission and turn it into a 5-stage battle. We don't want to be doing that on the day of the shoot. So we do a lot of rehearsing in advance. We try and bring in the actual talent we're going to use for those rehearsals. If not, we'll video everything and make sure the talent get that well in advance. And we always do that with a professional trainer as well. That's not just us kind of like making things up. And which really helps, on the shoot day. It really makes it easy to order all of your shots, and it just makes it really, really efficient on the day for when you're actually shooting. And I guess this is more important for the character-specific stuff, and also on the presentation side. We try and provide as much reference material to the talent in advance as the shoot as we can. Obviously we don't get many UFC fighters coming to the studio, so we have to emulate a lot of their kind of like personality traits and taunts and their intros and celebrations and things. So we basically, pick good, solid acting and fighting talent that can emulate them. And we try and get them as much video reference as we can as soon as we can. And then really, really important for our ground game is trying to pick up as much video reference as we possibly can. We try and get at least 4 angles really, really close and tight on the ground game, because when we're animating it and, we do a lot of external development, which I'll come on to shortly, these videos are invaluable for actually getting things right. And I've got a really, really bad memory, so I need to order my data as quickly as I possibly can, because whenever we go into shoots, no matter how organised we are, there's always naming convention issues, or we forget to pick something up, or we pick up a load of extra moves that we didn't think of in the first place. And if I don't order it immediately, a couple of days go past and I'll be ordering the wrong things and, leaving all the things I was meant to order and everything else. So yeah, I always stress to order your data as quickly as possible. And then going on to the Mighty Motion Builder. Lock down your animation template as quickly as you can and put it through a really stringent sort of set of tests. We've had a couple of issues on Fight Night Champion and also on the UFC where we'd be halfway through production and we'd realise there's an error in our rig, and then we'd have to retarget all of our animations to an updated rig. It's a complete pain because, one, it can sometimes take months worth of work. On top of that, that's the rig that we've sent to motion capture. It's also the rig that we've sent to our external developers, and there's nothing worse than having to communicate to them, oh, by the way, sorry, we screwed up, here's an update to the rig. Please reanimate a lot of this stuff or retarget it for us. And so, yeah, as I say, we try and get as many eyes on our rig as possible, and we work really hard with rigging to completely lock it down before we give it out to anybody. And also inside of that template, we try and provide as many constraints and poses. We still animate pose to pose for the most part. So I like to provide hand and feet poses and then all of our kind of key ground and clinch poses as well. Just makes it super, super quick and easy when we're animated. And on the constraint side, we still manually animate our trajectories. But we're trying to come up with more constraints to kind of proceduralize those as well. So we now have a lot more center of mass constraints with the two-man interactions that are all automated and just get spat out without us having to tidy them up. And yeah, going back to my first point about having a really small animation team, we now make sure we provide how-to documentation on every single animation feature we've got. So when Sega goes on holiday for 3 weeks, we've got somebody that can follow his workflows and carry on the work for him. These are really, really good as well to send out. Well, one, for onboarding new animators, and two, for sending out to our external developers. And then, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a complex sport, and you want to get things right. So, you know, review things with the people that know best. I mean, obviously, we don't run every animation past Dana White, but, you know, I'll pick Jeremy's brain or, you know, one of our lead designers' brains on, you know, is this animation right? Does it look authentic? And, yeah, I guess, that, you know, I don't know, telling your grandma, right, I suck eggs here, but, you know, come up with a really, really solid save and backup system. At the beginning of the UFC 1, they upgraded all our PCs and gave us all solid state drives, and they just kept consistently crashing, and we were losing, you know, weeks' worth of work. Also, Motion Builder still, for me, crashes probably 3 or 4 times a day, and, you know, I still forget to save and lose a ton of work. So just try and come up with a better process than we've had in the past. Backing up to Perforce, you know, daily and things like that helps. And so, yeah, as I said before, we've got a really small in-house animation team, and we had a hell of a lot of animation to get in the game. So the only option we had was external development. So, yeah, I mean, again, you have to plan early and, you know, lock down your budgets and start shopping around and finding the right guys to do the job. Again, this alludes back to the last slide. You know, you want to provide them with as much documentation, video reference, before and after examples as you possibly can. And yeah, trust their recommendations for workflows and sign-off processes. The first time I used external development was for Fight Night Champion, and before I'd even spoken to them, I kind of had this idea in my head of how things should run. And I kind of like, you know, so for the getting data to them, I decided I was going to try and, like, I don't know, FedEx in my hard drive every 2 weeks. And then I was going to have, like, USB backups on carrier pigeons to fly over just in case those hard drives didn't get there. You know, my review process was going to be, I was going to go over there every 3 weeks or something and, you know, sit down with them all and everything else. And then I spoke to them on the phone, and they were like, no, we've got fast specs. This is super, super fast for sending and delivering data. We've got this really, really cool review document. You can put videos in, you can sign things off. And, you know, these guys do this every day, so it's really good to listen to, you know, their procedures on how to do things best. And, yeah, I mean, send them as much reference material and swag as you possibly can. You really want to try and make these guys feel part of your team. We sent them over libraries and libraries of UFC events and posters, and just to make them feel like, you know, as part of the animation team as we could. Why is it not going? Oh, there we go. And obviously, if you've got really, really complex workflows you need to run through, you know, send somebody over there as well. So this was for Fight Night Champion. The guy at the front there, Lucky, we sent him over to OF3D. He spent a week out there just making sure everything was watertight, and, you know, it was a really good PR thing as well. They absolutely loved having him out there, and he had a really good experience. And this is something I'm really, really terrible at, and I can't say this enough. Set aside a lot of time for preparing data to send out and also reviewing when it comes back. I didn't do this. I scheduled myself completely, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, God, I've got to review all of this data. And so I ended up sort of reviewing all of this stuff at home, and it'd be like, you know, I'd be at dinner parties, I'd be drunk, and I'm reviewing animation data and stuff. So if there's some shoddy-looking animations in the game, that's probably the reason why. And, yeah, you know, obviously be critical when you need to, but, you know, let them know if they're doing a good job. If they are, it's, you know, they love hearing praise, and you'll be surprised how good the quality of the animation is you're going to get back. And, yeah, again, back to the previous point, you know, enjoy it. Think of part of them as your own team. I mean, Technicolor at one point, I guess, were 3 or 4 times the size of my in-house animation team. And, you know, it's kind of a reality for a lot of us now. I think, you know, a lot of us depend on external development. It's not going away, so you might as well embrace it. And here's just some metrics. Over half our gameplay animations we sent out to Technicolor, and pretty much all of our presentation work went their way. Okay, and this is just an example of the rear naked choke, one of the finishes, so one of the 22 animations. And there's the raw mocap and obviously the cleanup. And I think on their part, that was probably half a day to a day's worth of work. Okay, so now on to the ant side of things. So what we do is we export from Motion Builder into Ant, which is our in-house game engine. We start sequencing the assets up, and from there, that's where we start tagging and retiming things slightly, and then we go into the relative IK controller.
Yeah, so this might not be a surprise to you, but getting a GDC talk approved by EA is not an easy process.
So we've been...
Yeah, so we were told we're not allowed to show any screenshots of our animation tool, which I don't totally understand.
We've got about 10 minutes of...
Yeah, no, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
So
I don't know what we're going to do.
No screenshots allowed, but we're allowed to give all the information. It seems like a weird rule, but it worked. We're standing here. We got approval relatively easy.
How do we explain relative IK without showing images?
Well, we'll show it.
I'm having a heart attack here, Geoff. I'm panicking a little bit.
Let me give you a little bit of background on relative IK first. So relative IK was built initially by the MMA team, and we took the technology a little bit further. It's there to solve the problem of having two players playing two-player animations, interacting in close quarters, but having those players be able to support variable heights, proportions, stuff like that. So probably the worst-case example in the UFC is Stefan Struve, who's close to 7 feet tall, fighting against Roy Nelson, who's under 6 feet tall. And Roy Nelson has a huge gut, and Stefan Struve is very skinny. And we need them playing those animations where they're all tangled up like a pretzel. So the solution that we came up with is a workflow and tool process where the animators can author constraints relative to the other fighter in this animation tool. So let's say we were going to animate a rear naked choke, for example. Just stand right here.
Okay.
So I'm taller than Lee, as you can see.
You're the Stefan Struve to my Roy Nelson.
Exactly,
is what you are.
That.
Sure.
So if we were to take the raw mocap, cleaned up mocap, and apply it to our skeletons in-game, which have all these different proportions, it would, I'll show you first, this is what the rear naked choke should look like. So the animation comes back, obviously, something like this. Completely...
I'm not that much shorter, really.
So this is basically what it would look like in-game without any relative IK.
Yeah, it's not very effective.
So the first thing that we do is identify the most important joint for this. So that would be my right forearm here. It has to be attached to Lee's neck here. So we can create a constraint between my forearm and his neck. And now if physics was to alter the animation and move Lee around,
which it does.
Yeah, my forearm would follow his neck and be pinned directly to his neck joint. But the rest would obviously do whatever they're doing naturally. So the next most important joint is my left hand. I would author a constraint between the back of Lee's head and my left hand, and now we've got that component. Now the last piece is my right hand here, and I've got to IK that to my own bicep, so we supported constraints to yourself as well. And that's basically got it, except because I am taller, my hips are higher than Lee, and the proper animation technique would have me a little bit lower. So don't get too excited here, Lee, but I'm going to create a constraint between our hips, and that would drop me down right here.
Snuggle up, buttercup.
Okay, so that's good enough for a basic idle. If I wanted to start punching Lee in the head, I would have to play a layered animation on my left hand.
Oh, lovely.
So it would look something like this. The problem is I've got a constraint pinning my hand to the back of his head, so you get something that looks like that. So we had to introduce a floating point variable that would allow us to turn down the reach on my left hand as we played this layered animation that would start punching him in the head, and then turn the reach on as the punch ended. And then finally, if I was to start squeezing a little bit tighter and finish this move, there we go. I have to animate, the animators would animate a curve that would release the IK constraints off of Lee, and now I'm back to playing my regular full body animation. So that was the general gist of the relative IK controller. With that hip height thing, we had the ability to have the constraint affect only one axis. I think there were a few other little tricks in there, but for the most part, that's what it was. And it worked relatively well. Let me move him out of the way. It worked relatively well. Sorry about that, Lee. Maybe I should wake him up. All right. So that worked relatively well. We did have to cheat a little bit, and this is probably one of the takeaways for this problem. When you've got extreme height differences, if you can get away with cheating, go for it. So in our stand-up, the fighters have their full scales and proportions and everything like that. But when we go for a takedown and bring the fight to the ground, we actually reduce their scales to be within a threshold that we find much more manageable. This is the first time we've talked about this publicly. The game's been out for a year, half a year, 8 months or something like that, and no one noticed at all. So if you go and watch some videos and look at the takedowns, there's actually a curve that reduces the heights of the fighters as they go to the ground. It made cases like really, really small legs trying to wrap around really wide shoulders manageable, because we would have had to create special animations for those cases. So this brought things within the realm of feasible. But we still needed all this stuff because we needed to maintain the thickness differences between the fighters because they were rigged up that way. And a lot of their likeness comes from the bigger chest or bigger head or whatever it is. So we would have handles on the mesh that were joints in the skeleton, and those were unique per fighter. The bones were meant to correspond with the surface of the mesh, and then you would IK the constraints to those joints. And this here is the example of the rear naked choke in-game as it should.
Great movement on the ground. And now he's got his back. Trying to get in a position to get that rear naked choke. He's got it under. Trying to finish this fight. That rear naked choke is in deep, and he's sending out the appetite. John Jones finishes with the choke. Set it up, close it off, got the choke for the tap. It's time for our fight replay. And let's see this one more time. A classic rear naked choke, perfectly executed for the victory.
So there's probably about, I don't know, what, like 8 or 10 constraints in an animation like that?
Yeah,
something like that. So it added a ton of extra work for authoring these two-player animations, but it effectively solved the problem that we were faced with.
Yeah, we almost felt like we were reanimating them to a certain extent, and it was a pretty painful process to set up relative IK for each and every ground.
Yeah, it was
takedown, clinch, it was everywhere. We ended up doing thousands of them in the end.
the mocap and the animation cleanup that we traditionally use was the mechanics of the animation, but then this relative IK was a way of authoring the intent of the animation, which was captured absolutely nowhere else. So it was vital in order to do some of these IK fix-ups. Okay, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about our locomotion system. The reason I picked this is because I think it's, everyone has a locomotion system in their game, or most people do. We all face the same problems, and there were a couple of interesting solutions that we came up with that I thought might be of interest to other game companies. So I'm going to talk about, at a high level, how our locomotion system was architected from an animation standpoint, and then I'll do a deep dive on some of the procedural solutions we used to solve the problem of turning on the spot when you have a large variety of animations to work with. Okay, so I'm sure these problems and constraints are the same for most games. We have fighting priorities. First one was visual quality. Obviously, we wanted our locomotion system to look really good. We were Gen 4 exclusive, so there was an expectation that we would have very high quality animation, no foot sliding, conservation of momentum, all that good stuff. And on the flip side, we needed high level of responsiveness. This is a competitive Twitch game. Responsiveness is very important, and if you don't have that responsiveness, it breaks the immersion of actually playing the game competitively. And this piece was unique, for me at least. I've never worked on a game that had this much variety in terms of locomotion style. So we had a roster of over 100 fighters. Each had a unique look, and authenticity was critical for this. This was the only place where the personality of the fighters was expressed. And UFC fans are very, very attached to their favorite fighter, and they know exactly what they look like when they're in the ring. So the authenticity required that we have unique idle poses for every fighter. So I knew we did not have the budget or the time to capture unique locomotion sets over top of every one of these idle poses. So we were going to have to come up with some sort of procedural solution to mix and match all this stuff together. I knew that it would solve the variety requirements. I knew that it would solve the responsiveness problem. But the big question was, would we be able to achieve the visual quality that we were after using these procedural solutions. So the locomotion system was broken down into two kind of big parts. I'm oversimplifying here in this diagram, but it kind of gives you an idea of how it was put together. On the one side, we have the movement state machine. Now, this is pretty standard fare in a video game. You've got your idle state, you transition to your movement state. Maybe you have a 180-degree turn that plays when you have to change directions, that kind of stuff. So these animations are very functional. They support the basic movement of the character, changes of directions, lunges, slips, basically all the functional things that a fighter needs to do in the ring. The animations were very short, as I said, very functional. We had large functional coverage, so we had all kinds of different speeds and directions and context within the ring. But we had very small aesthetic coverage. I think we only had 2 sets of actual locomotion cycles. One was light and one was heavy. The difference between them was pretty minor, but that's it in terms of variety for the game. Nowhere near enough to support what we needed. And on the flip side, we had our idle state machine. Now this is where those idols that I showed earlier would play. You've got your idle animation. Every once in a while, the guy would play a little twitch or bounce up and down, fix his hair, that type of stuff. So this is where the personality of the fighter was really expressed. These were mostly aesthetic animations. They served no real functional purpose. You'd express the personality of the fighter, the emotion of the fight, and the narrative of the fight. And these animations were exact opposite of the other ones. They had very, very small functional coverage, massive aesthetic coverage, and these animations were very, very long, and we really wanted to see every frame of those animations play out during the game. That was important. So we had to find a way to procedurally combine these two systems to achieve the best of both worlds. So the first thing that I tried is kind of the obvious, naive approach. Let's stick the idle state machine on the upper body, let's stick the movement state machine on the lower body, and see what happens. And it kind of achieved what we were after, for the most part. But the animations looked very disconnected and stiff, mostly because of the shared hip joint and a lot of the movement in the spine. You wanted to see that with the movements, but that's where a lot of the animation came in these idols as well. And on top of that, some lower body animations absolutely needed upper body movement in them. Some of the upper body animations absolutely needed lower body animation. They would take a step back and fix his hair and stuff like that. And some of them needed to be complete full body animations. So we tried a few different things. We allowed the mask that defined what each layer controlled to be dynamic, and that solved some of the problems. But it didn't get to the fundamental problem, which was animations needed to share influence over core joints along the spine and in the hips. So this little trick worked out quite well. So for our movement state machine, we would have the regular state machine that's pictured there in blue. And we created a complete copy of that state machine that was running the exact same animations, the exact same logic as the first state machine, but it was additive animation. And we relied on the fact that our engine was deterministic so that we knew these two state machines would transition in lockstep and always be in the exact same state. So I threw this into the set of layers, and this now gave me a new set of data to draw from when we were mixing and matching all these animations. I could have the idle state machine as the base layer playing full body. I could have the lower body with foot IK targets playing from the regular state machine, and then I could have additive animation from the locomotion set playing on the hips and spine. And that solved the problem of the stiff, disconnected animations. I think of this now, when we moved from, PS2 to PS3, people stopped just animating on the FK rig and started animating on the IK rig for various reasons. It was a very useful technique, and the computing power opened that up. I don't think this is anywhere near that type of step forward. It's the first problem that I've used this technique on, but I think it has some potential for other areas. If you have the memory and the cycles, in order to have a full set of additive animation to mix along with your FK and IK animation, I think it's something that might be worth exploring. It really worked for this particular problem. Okay, so that was our base locomotion system, mixed together procedurally with the additive animation. And from there, we added a bunch of procedural techniques that were layered one after the other in the engine. The first one was our procedural foot planting system. Now, this has been around for a long time. It's shared by many of the EA Sports games. The way this works is there's information calculated in the animation pipeline that is continuous and blends well together and is able to inform an IK system whether the foot has just become planted or just become unplanted, and we can pin the foot in place. This is what allows us to do all of this animation mixing and procedural alteration of the hips. And like if you imagine you're just turning the character by rotating his root, this is what keeps the feet in place. On top of that, we have a procedural head tracking system. There's nothing fancy here. This does the eye movement, blinking, head tracking, that type of stuff. Most games have something similar. Next, this one was kind of a running joke on the game team because we were struggling to final and the game wasn't even functional. And our art director was asking for procedural toe splay. And we thought it was the biggest waste of time. But it actually only took a couple of days to get it in, and I regrettably admit that it actually made the fighter feel more grounded on the floor. So this leveraged our foot planting data, and we would just blend in a pose of the feet splaying and unsplaying as the foot planted on the ground. And it's subtle, but it actually really makes a difference, even from the gameplay camera. And this was a little script I wrote at the end of the project that would square up the hips of the fighter as he approached the cage. So we didn't have time or budget to capture specific animations for when the player backs into the cage. So I procedurally rotated the hips, the knees, and the feet to square up his pose as he backed up into the cage. We probably would have tried to capture that if it had been at the beginning of the project that we realized this problem. But this turned out really, really well, and for UFC 2, I think we're just going to leave it the way it is. There's some funkiness with the knees and foot angles that I think could have been better, but overall this was a very successful approach. And the last thing was the procedural turning. So this was a system that allowed us to procedurally turn the character on the spot. So I'm going to dive into this one in detail because I was really, really happy with the end results here. And I've worked on several games that needed to solve this problem. And the solutions that we came up with in the past were to basically just either play a full body turn animation, maybe you have different steps of different lengths, and then you have to blend between those. But then the player could need to turn fast or slow, so you'd need to try and track, and to keep up, you might need some dead reckoning, but then you're overshooting, and it just never looked good. On top of that, I wanted the upper body idle to be playing all the time and not interrupted, so playing turn animations wasn't necessarily the best thing because you've got a cadence of movement in the idle that you don't want interrupted by all these weird, erratic footsteps. So we had an implementation that was just playing an animation. It really didn't look good. It was introducing a lot of bugs because our game doesn't support one player facing the other player's back, so they always have to be facing each other. That's a big hole in our animation coverage. So I'll dive into the details there. So this is the basic idle animation for GSP. If he was bouncing up and down or his feet were moving at all, our foot planting system would work great with this. I'd probably be able to turn him on the spot and things would look decent. The problem here is this animation has both feet firmly planted on the ground, and I want to be able to rotate his root and have him face his opponent at basically an arbitrary speed. So I needed to figure out a way to solve this. So let's get right back to first principles. Let's just turn him, face his opponent. And this is kind of the starting point for the procedural solution. We have everything functional that we need, but we have absolutely nothing with the feet. He's just sliding around. So this was the key observation that made this procedural technique work. If you look at his hips, there's constant hip movement in the animation. He's moving forward and back at varying cadence. Every idle animation in the game had a different cadence for that movement. Sometimes he was hopping up and down. Sometimes it was very quick. Sometimes it was very slow. But the feet were always moving back and forth, or the hips were always moving back and forth and back and forth. So I thought, okay, if the hips are moving towards one foot and then away from that foot, the weight must be planted on that foot. So I need to figure out a way to know when is the weight planted on the lead foot and when is the weight planted on the back foot. So in the animation pipeline, we were able to check. We divided up the animations into segments where the hip was moving towards the lead foot and where the hips were moving away from the lead foot. Take the midpoint of those, break them up, and then you've got nice continuous curves cued off of the hip curves in the animation that would tell you when the fighter was on, his weight was on the lead foot and when it was on the back foot. And once we had that data, the rest of the solution kind of fell into place. So this is what it looked like when we started feeding those curves into the foot planting system. You can see the feet are starting to move a little bit more naturally. They still look a little sticky. There's no lift in the feet. And yeah, it looks really stiff, but we're starting to get somewhere. So that was just feeding the data straight to our foot planting engine. The next thing, and now this is an exaggerated tuning number, just so you can see the effect happening. So started just lifting the feet procedurally using those same set of curves. Our foot planting system, as I said, is continuous and it blends well, but it is not, it does not predict at all. It's a threshold. As soon as this number crosses this value, the foot is planted. These curves, on the other hand, are continuous and very predictive, so I know exactly when the foot needs to be lifted and when it needs to be on the ground, so we're able to drive the foot height based off of those curves. And this is, yeah, oh, sorry, I skipped ahead a slide. Back. It's not playing. I'm going to go back 2. And forward 1. Nope. Back 1. Sorry about this. There we go.
That's weird. Oh, there you go.
There we go. So this is the, these are the tuning values that we ended up shipping with for the foot height. So I was pretty happy with the way the feet looked in this example, but it still looks like someone stuck a stick up his ass and was turning him on a pivot point in the middle, and there's good reason for that because that's exactly what was happening. We were pivoting, well, not the stick part, but we were pivoting him around a point that was directly under his center of mass, and that point was not moving at all, so a very unnatural rotation movement. So just as an experiment, I wanted to see what would it look like if we pivoted around the planted foot and that pivot point moved back and forth between the planted feet. I know that that's not physically correct, but I was just curious to see what it would look like. And this was the result of that. Way too wobbly, way too exaggerated, but you're starting to get some hip movement that looks somewhat natural and is conveying some of the movement that I was hoping to see. So when we dial that back by saying, okay, let's only use 30% of that movement, 20% of that movement, the pivot point is now ping-ponging between the front and back foot at the same cadence that the feet are planting, that's just not going as extreme. This is the result. This is basically what we ended up shipping with. It's not perfect. It's not as good as if the animators did it, but it has the property of working across every animation in our library of idols. And I think it's passable. I was pretty happy with the end results. So this is the exact same technique applied to Conor McGregor's idol. He has a much more active idol, so I think the technique kind of amplifies some of that movement, which maybe isn't what we wanted, but it worked out relatively well. And here's another one, Jose Aldo, another pretty active idol, but you can see a totally different cadence in his movement, and the technique holds up pretty well. So I was really happy with the end result there. So I think that was it for the locomotion system. In the end, I was really happy with the results. There's a few things that I'd like to try and improve, but those two takeaways for me were the use of additive animation as a way of mixing animations together, and this technique of using the hip movement to infer plantedness for the feet.
But yes, we've still got a long way to go to get things remotely correct and authentic. You probably saw in the final John Jones rear naked choke there, yeah, we still have really, really rudimentary collision volumes on our hands and none on our fingers. And so it pained me to ship with this. To be fair, I don't think many reviewers or even players really picked up on it. but you do see a lot of hands floating and sinking. There was a couple of things there. I think one, the rig we had in Motion Builder didn't do a good enough job of emulating the final rig we had in game. There was some rendering things going on with the flesh deformation.
Yeah, I'll talk about that later.
Okay, cool. Jeff can go into a far more technical description on that. But yeah, I wasn't happy with the floating and sinking of the hands. And likewise, you know, same thing again with the cloth. It looked really good when the fighters were standing toe to toe. The second they got to the ground, the cloth didn't really react with the animation. And so again, you saw lots of clipping and yeah, it kind of broke down there.
And then, yeah, so Lee mentioned this already. We had a soft body physics system that wasn't really soft body physics. It ended up being a brute force tagging process that was propped up by some vertex shaders on the rendering side. So there was a vertex shader that would look at the amount of penetration between the physics volumes, and based on some tuning variables, it would displace the vertices to kind of give you that mushiness that you see when two legs are wrapped around each other or something like that. The way we achieved this was really, really brute force and did not scale at all. We had tags in all of the animations that would determine how much penetration was allowed between the physics volumes while they were in particular poses or over time as they were playing back in animation. And tuning that stuff was a nightmare and was not scalable at all. And this is a really, really big learning for us. Physics was fighting with IK, so they were two completely different systems. They would go in different passes. So IK would go first. It would IK, say, my arm to my other arm, and then physics would run and it would move this arm out of place, and now the IK constraint that we created just got broken. And the animators were spending tons of time authoring those constraints, and then physics would just break it. So at the last minute, we had to add a new system to our physics engine that would create even more constraints inside the physics engine for joints that were particularly important to stay in place, so like hands on the floor or hand on the back of the head, things that were very, very obvious. But that was like just a nightmare of like late nights, me just tagging up animations because the animators were busy doing things that I can't do and did not scale well. We're going to try and get our physics engine and IK engine unified, but that's a huge, huge problem to solve.
And yeah, here's some examples of how bad it got.
Aldo with the flying knee. Ow! Jose Aldo! He knocked him out with his balls, Mike. It's a testicle knockout. Let's look at the replay. Balls right in the face, Joe. A classic mummy guard. Look for him to break his body in half and stop Melendez from getting his guard. Joe, as we know, the only way to get into the mummy guard is by jumping erratically on the ball. For the fans at home that are maybe new to the sport, is he allowed to kick him in the balls that much? Only if it's been completely frozen for several minutes, Mike. Joe, why is it that Cat Zingano is so hard to shake here? Half the cat's torso is actually fused to the mat. She's also been able to distort her body in some positions that I can only describe as supernatural. Very grudge-like, Joe. And Conor McGregor seems completely unaffected by this onslaught by Bruce Lee, Joe. Got a hell of a chin, Mike. A hell of a chin. Young Bobby. No, he doesn't, Mike. Cat Zingano moving forward, and Liz Carmouche is thrown in the air by a demonic force. Scrambling, looks like Ryan's got the upper hand. Uriah Faber's wearing the brown in the backpack. This is a bad position. My backpack's thrown through a lot of wear and tear. He was able to learn to cover Uriah's pants earlier, but it looks like he's stuck here. Uriah going for a submission. What are his options, Joe? I see 13 different backpack wearing submissions here. He really needs to watch himself, and he's out. Chris Weidman trying to spawn a second Chris Weidman. And he's out, Joe. Yeah, but that second Chris Weidman looks broken, Mike. He might have to start again. The start of round 2. Scott Jorgensen should not have had that bigger vodka between rounds. Not at all, Joe. Alexis Davis and Cat Zingano in an intense breakdance battle. These moves are straight sick, Joe. Mike, nobody talks like that. And it is all over.
Yeah.
Credit to Tommy Tohold for the
Yes.
entertaining video. Yeah. Those bugs were pretty rare, but if you study that video, you can see where we use physics, where we use AK. It's all fully exposed for the whole world to see.
There's quite a few on YouTube, that's for sure. So yeah, workflow improvements other than trying to fix all that stuff. Yeah, we've got one game out there, so we can start getting feedback, good and bad, from the reviewers and, you know, more importantly, the people that play it. It's obviously something we didn't have with the first kick at the can, so it's just good to have that feedback. And yeah, I'm trying to make our external development partners more responsible for basically everything. I mean, at the end of the day, they're doing an awesome job, but what we did in the UFC one a lot of the time was, if they kind of got the animations 90% of the way, I was kind of lazy and couldn't be bothered to email them, and I'd just fix up the last 10% myself. So now I'm just going to try and make those guys do, you know, 100% of the cleanup and get them ready for exporting into Ant. And yes, automating relative IK. The relative IK was this hellish tool we had to use inside of Ant, and we're trying to automate it as much as we possibly can. We probably spent a year's worth of time between the animation team. We had QA, we had producers, we had, you know, tea ladies doing relative IK for us. It was a horrible, horrible process, and we're trying to eliminate that completely. Can't even remember this one. Oh yes, so again, like I said before, in the motion builder template, we're trying to automate our trajectories as much as we possibly can. We animate pose to pose, and then we have to reanimate the trajectories. None of it really made any sense, and it's often really buggy. And a lot of the bugs on the animation side were caused because we had sloppy animation on our trajectories. So yeah, trying to eliminate that workflow.
As I mentioned earlier, a big thing we're trying to do is move our IK system into the physics engine so that they're not fighting with each other. Trying to simplify the workflows for adding animation content into the game. So this is just automating whatever processes we can, any tagging that we can do, try and get a first pass of that tagging in some procedural way. We have new technology from our central animation team that allows us to have shared tag templates across all of our animations, so we're going to try and integrate that. Just anything that can shave off a few minutes of work with the amount of animation that we're adding for UFC 2 will save us a ton of time. Another big one, unifying the clinch, ground, and takedown system. So we were designing our game as we were building it. One of the big problems with a UFC game is you need a ton of content before you can objectively start playing the game in a competitive way. And so designs were changing as we were adding tons of content, and things ended up in a real mishmash at the end. So we're circling back, trying to unify those designs, and it should simplify a lot of the animation workflows along the way. So that leads to this point. Validate your design before going wide with content wherever possible. So we learned that lesson in the first one. So now we're trying to validate the new design on our grappling system with a very small set of core positions wherever possible. And then we'll only go wide once we're happy with the results and we get some sign-off from production. And this was a big one. I mentioned the tagging of physics for the penetration for the soft body stuff. The other thing was, because we had to have physics on during the ground, when you were playing transition animations and you were blending from different poses, limbs could get stuck on each other and you'd end up in these weird contorted positions. So we had to temporarily turn off physics to allow the limbs to go through each other and then settle in their pose. But that was a huge manual tagging process. Again, QA would find a bug, we'd tag a little snippet of a clip to let the joints go through each other and then turn physics back on. I'm going to try the opposite this time. So when you're settled in an idle pose, I think it's important that a hand doesn't settle inside a head, so we're going to have physics on by default in the idle poses and then have that tuning system to fix things up. When you're in the middle of a transition, I think it's okay for limbs that are moving quickly to go through each other. It's less noticeable than when they get caught up. So we're going to turn off physics for limb-limb penetration during transitions and then turn them back on again once you settle in an idle. Hopefully that reduces the amount of tagging that we need to do, but we'll just have to wait and see. And enforce naming conventions. We were horrible at this in UFC 1. When we're going back to try and clean things up or swap things out, it's really, really, really hard to find things. So do this early and be consistent with it. I think that's it. So if we have time, any questions? We'll start here and we can work that way.
Very entertaining and informative talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Quick question about the turn system. I saw that you guys really changed the facing of the whole character at all times. Did you ever consider like turning the upper body first and then having the lower body follow, or was it a design decision because we had to like move forward?
No, it was not a design decision. It was mostly, I was doing it myself as a programmer. I'm not an animator, and that kind of thing doesn't come to the forefront of my head as quickly as it does for them, and time constraints. So they gave that kind of feedback, but we just absolutely had no time to do it. I agree. I think it would look a lot better if we had some anticipatory movement in there. Because it's procedural, we could actually accomplish that, I think, but just taking the time to build it into the system wasn't a design choice at all. Just
awesome.
limited
Congrats on
time.
the game. I played it just for the visuals and
Oh,
the
sweet.
animations. That was really interesting.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah.
Hi, two questions. Did you animate on the same size skeleton for your interactions?
Yes, yeah, everything was done on the same size skeleton, both male and female fighters.
And then part two, what size kind of differential could you have between the characters before the relative IK kind of got challenging, or did it work for all
It really depended. Sometimes, I mean, you could take a Stefan Strude, who was a 1.5 foot taller than a Roy Nelson, and things would just work.
Our worst case scenario when we were testing this stuff was always that Stefan Struve against a shorter guy and Mark Hunt against Roy Nelson. If you don't know who those guys are, they're very large. They both have very large bellies. So when they're in a pose where they're belly on top of belly, they're kind of floating on top of each other quite a bit, and it's very noticeable. So we had to tune the penetration quite a bit to allow their bellies to penetrate. And then at the same time, if you know MMA, north-south is kind of, I don't want to demonstrate north-south with you, but my head would be on top of his belly, and because he has such a big belly, the head would just be sticking right inside the belly with
You're
the
not
same...
talking about me, are you?
No. With the same tuning numbers, so we had to retune it for the head to push the head out, and that was just a huge nightmare. But yeah, those were kind of our two worst case scenarios that we tuned against.
And we did have some preview ability inside of Ant as well. So in Ant we could scale uniformly, but we could take a guy to sort of a size and a half of the other one and see where things broke as well. So there was a certain amount of...
We turned off the non-uniform scaling when we were on the ground as well, like I said, and also reduced the height differential. But in the stand-up and the clinch and all that grappling, we had the full set of non-uniform scaling as well. So it kind of varied where you were in the game and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Oh, sure.
Okay. Congratulations, first. Please, could you tell something funny or experience about the Bruce Lee character creation?
The Bruce Lee, the whole Bruce Lee thing, I found
about the head.
Yeah, that was definitely the bizarrest thing. So marketing came to us and they said, we're going to put Bruce Lee in the game. And we all sort of went, okay. And, we scanned the majority of our fighters' heads. And obviously with Bruce Lee, God bless him, he's no longer around. But the Bruce Lee Foundation didn't see this as an issue. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? And then this box arrived on our producers' desks. And it was a bust, a life-size, and it was an actual mould of him, obviously, when he was alive, pretty much in his prime. And we actually used that to scan, and that's how his head looks as good as it does in game. It was all painted and everything.
Yeah, there was a disembodied head of Bruce Lee sitting on the conference room table.
Head, which was actually from the Bruce Lee Foundation. And they were wonderful. His daughter, Shannon, came to visit the office, and they were just really good. And they, obviously they wanted to sign off the likeness and everything else. But at the end of the day, I think they were really happy with the results. But yeah, the head was really quite bizarre. It was like the end of 7 or something. Spoiler alert. But.
I see a 1 back there. That's either 1 minute or one question. Either way, it's probably you.
Well, first up, I hope that head mold was captured when he was alive. But, so I was curious on your mocap system, when you were capturing all the takedowns and clinches and all that, how did you guys handle marker drop-off?
Oh, God. We didn't, badly. I mean, we had traditional mocap suits, so it was a lot of, replacing the markers. One thing we did do, which I think helped us, we put a lot of the cameras really low. So our mocap studio, they've got it down to a fine art, and we brought everything in really tight and really low. And so when we dropped markers, we didn't really lose the data as much, but it was a case of, all right, marker down, let's try and find it, and you end up going marker mad at the end. But
we were just in mocap a month ago, and one of the things I didn't realize until I sat in on that one was how much the Velcro for the markers was impeding the talent. So they're doing all this grappling, and then they get stuck on each other because of the Velcro, so we'd have to do different takes and stuff. It was It was really difficult, but the data looked great in the end.
Yeah, we try and sort of, get the talent to just carry on, don't worry about it. If he's stuck on his head, just tear it away. We'll animate it out. But it's a nightmare. And they're really hard as well when the talent fall on those. I mean, we use crash mats and things for the takedowns and things, but they're still rolling on mats this thick, and they come out pretty bruised at the end. But they're fighters, so it's kind of what they do, right?
I think that's it. I think we're out of time. So thanks again, guys.
Yes, thank you very much.
Happy to answer any questions up here too.